If you were to ask teenage me what films I thought were most important at the time, the cult classic The Crow would have definitely been in my top 10. Here we are, 30 years later, and I couldn't even bring myself to support the remake enough to show up at the theater. Despite being a rather obvious and cynical cash grab, why did this bomb so badly? It had a big-name star, the cult following of the original film, and a beloved graphic novel to fall back on for the writing. Well, you probably won't be surprised when the guy that runs a storytelling channel tells you that the main issue here is storytelling. What can we learn from this? Before we get into that, though, make sure you hit the like and subscribe for me. The master of Kung Fu and friendship gets a warm, fuzzy feeling when you do that. It's like that dopamine hit you get from petting puppies, or that puppies get when you pet them. That's me. I'm the puppy in this example. Killed that intro. So, I'm going to be honest right away. I hate this. I hate the idea of this so much. I would have only had to see this picture and I would immediately lose all interest in a remake of The Crow. Apparently, dumbfaced Joker in Suicide Squad didn't teach anyone in Hollywood anything. The initial reaction to set photos was a collective groan, but producers were like, no, give it a chance, you'll like it, and then people showed up and decided that they were right to groan and didn't like it. The first important lesson is right here, folks. Like people you meet in the world, when your audience tells you who they are, believe them. This is going to become much more important later, let me tell you. Now, despite the crappy makeup, the face tattoos, and all that, I'm going to divorce myself from the appearances, the acting performances, and everything else having to do with the ugh of it all, and we're going to just focus solely on the story. So, here's the thing. If I groaned and I didn't want to see the movie, and then critics widely came out and said, hey, this was pretty good. And then a few online commenters were like, yeah, despite first impressions, this is a spectacular movie. Well, now you're going to get the master of Kung Fu and friendship curious. Good news travels faster than you think. Yeah, it may bomb in its first weekend, but once people are talking to their friends and hearing good things, they're going to want to check it out. What I'm getting at is that a compelling story can let you get away with a lot of weird stuff, whether it be face tattoos, having a love triangle with your sister, or hitting on your own mother in high school. This is a deep dive, but we're also building off of a film that already worked once, right? So, let's first establish a quick roadmap of the original film. Obviously, from here on, I can promise you massive spoilers, so if you've never seen the original movie, you need to go do that right now. No one should be deprived of that experience. With that out of the way, what we're looking at is a very simple revenge story told in a game of death style. We'll get to more on that in a second. With supernatural elements, and the setting is a crime-infested metropolitan slum, stylized with a very young, quote-unquote, goth motif and soundtrack. Here's the through line. Rock musician Eric Draven and his fiancée Shelley were killed a year ago. As the voiceover at the start of the film tells us, sometimes something happens so bad that a soul can't rest, and a crow returns them to the world to see justice done. First of all, let's just take all of that in for just a second. What that intro tells us is that their love is so strong that one of the lovers' souls can't rest because of what happened to the other. Then we have a black crow, an ancient symbol of real-world creatures that walk the line between Earth and the afterlife. That's goth as hell. Then we have the implied crime that was committed against them. So, the intro tells us exactly what we're going to get. Revenge, crime, memories of a powerful love, and it's going to be a dark tone. Is it going to be any surprise when I tell you that this film gives you exactly what it tells you it's going to give you? Now, what did I mean by game of death style? Well, our star here is Brandon Lee, son of Bruce Lee, and in Bruce's final film, Game of Death, his hero must climb a pagoda to reach his antagonist, but each floor of the pagoda has a champion on it that Bruce Lee must defeat in order to continue. We've seen this in many other films, like Kill Bill, where the hero goes one by one down the line of everybody they must defeat. It's arguably the core mechanic behind level design in early video games. Battle through all the level bosses until you get to the final boss. What is the point of this style of storytelling? Well, we're in a revenge story, and what we're doing is extremely similar to a hero's journey. There are trials, and every one of them is either physical, mental, or both. The Dread Pirate Roberts overcomes 2 battles back-to-back in order to enter into a battle of wits with the man holding Buttercup. Same thing, even though The Princess Bride is not a revenge story. We need to see the hero use every tool he has and push his limits to the breaking point to overcome the evil. But he does overcome it because his cause is just. This last part is also going to be very important later. Now let's talk about the 2024 remake. Former drug addict Eric Draven and his girlfriend Shelley were killed while on the run from a crime kingpin with magic powers. Here we go. While in a kind of purgatory which resembles a rail yard, an enigmatic stranger gives Eric the chance to return with a crow that gives him Wolverine-level healing so that he can go after the man that ordered their deaths. When he begins this journey of revenge, he gets Shelley's mother killed and finds out Shelley herself used to work for the crime lord that killed them and she once killed someone herself for him. Eric loses his faith in their relationship, which makes him lose his powers and die again, but then while he's in the afterlife he decides he does really believe in them and goes back to Earth and kills everybody. But because the evil magic man made a deal with the devil that made Shelley's innocent soul go to hell, Eric decides to take her place in hell, and she retroactively comes back to life at the end. It took a couple of lines to explain the plot of the original. It took an entire paragraph to explain the plot of the remake. And that's our first lesson that we can take from this. Kiss. Keep it simple, stupid. I've said this so many times on this channel, but plots should never be this convoluted. Let's be clear here. Stephen King's The Stand, unabridged, is over 1,000 pages. Yet the plot could be summed up as, in the wake of a pandemic that wipes out most of humanity, those that are left are called upon to join together as the ultimate battle between good and evil begins. Is there a lot of detail that you lose in an elevator pitch? Sure. But the pitch gives you exactly what it promises. The pandemic, the post-apocalypse, people joining together, and the ultimate battle is exactly what you get when you read The Stand. Here, we get a lot of noise in the plot. But there's a reason for that, and we're going to get to that in a second. Now, as long as we're clear on the first lesson, let's move on to some of the more broad strokes of the plot I just mentioned. There is this false start I just touched on where Eric becomes the Crow, then doubts his relationship with Shelley and dies again. So, this ancient cosmic force in the afterlife chooses one person to return every so often, and we're going to go with how it chose a guy that didn't have faith in his own relationship that he came back for. We're going to say that he got returned to Earth from the land of the dead to avenge the woman he loved so much that he didn't know anything about her. He didn't know her past, nor her connection to the man that killed them. Also, we're saying that he's come back to make things right, but effectively that's because his girlfriend's secret past got them killed. That's really what you want to go with. There's another really important lesson here that you see a lot of idiot writers in Hollywood forgetting about. Your characters, if they're well written, have a life that exists outside the page. If I fade to black on one scene and then flash forward to the next day, I can't pretend that my characters didn't have a single conversation without me. We can't just pick up exactly where we left off. People eat dinner and sit down and decompress and watch TV and talk to each other and go to the bathroom and try to sleep. If you forget all of that, characters become objects that are only there to serve whatever's in the next scene that you want to do. It makes them increasingly artificial and hard to believe. Think about how many times you've seen it in shows and movies, where if the characters would just sit down for 5 minutes and have a conversation with each other, the big misunderstanding would be all cleared up. Doesn't that drive you nuts? Sitcoms used to do this for comedic effect so much, it got beaten to death way back in the 90s. But apparently, Eric Draven and Shelley only ever laid in bed together, looking into each other's eyes and talking about how much they loved each other. They never discussed their past with each other, and somehow Shelley forgot to mention that the evil bad guy that they were running from was someone that she used to work for, and she was trying to screw him over by saving a video of him doing a magical murder on her phone. Yeah, I'm serious about the last part. The big bad in this movie is one guy that sold his soul to the devil centuries ago in order to live forever, and he knows this magical incantation that not only makes people off themselves, but also sends their innocent soul to hell. Why does the devil want people in hell that don't belong there? I have no idea. This is also a world where apparently the devil is allowed to do that, and God or whoever's supposed to be on the other side is just like, hey, those people belong in heaven, but that guy said the magic words, and so darn, I guess we lost them. It just reeks of never taking your ideas to their logical conclusion. If this fantasy world has a devil, and he wants innocent souls, then whoever's in charge of the place where innocent people are supposed to go has to be cool with the devil taking his people, you know? The ancient practice of, I licked it so it's mine, no take backsies. Now, in the original film, Eric Draven digs himself out of his grave about 5 minutes into the movie. In this movie, Eric doesn't even die until basically the end of the first act, which means he doesn't come back until the second, and once we're done with the whole doubting the relationship nonsense, he doesn't really become the Crow until the third act. Why the hell did that happen? Why is this story so far off the original and the graphic novel in this regard? Well, I know why. Oh, strap in. First, I'm just going to post this right up here. This is a recent article from the Mary Sue talking about the dead wife trope, which used to be called the women in refrigerators trope. This stems from a really crappy issue of Green Lantern in the mid-90s, where the lazy writer killed Green Lantern's girlfriend, and Green Lantern found her body in a refrigerator. The girlfriend wasn't a well-developed character at that point because this Green Lantern was brand new at the time, and the girlfriend was little more than a prop to incite Green Lantern to vengeance. In this article here, the author goes to great lengths to dump on what she calls the trope of a dead wife as an inciting event for the main character. There is a whole lot of, I thought we've moved past that, and general scolding, calling it lazy, and so forth. There's also a lot of explanation why this is such an offense, because the female character isn't her own person and isn't developed in the narrative, so she becomes objectified. This remake absolutely reeks of having tried to right this grave injustice. I have a lot of feelings about that. Let's start with the obvious. Motivation is not a trope. I'm going to say that again for the people in the back. Motivation is not a trope. In order to write a revenge story, you first need to have a grave offense to the protagonist that needs to be avenged. Unfortunately, there are only so many convincing reasons where that kind of revenge is justified. The death of a loved one, a grave personal injustice, or the kidnapping or taking of a loved one. You can dress it up in world building all you want, but at the end of the day, vengeance is enacted in a story primarily when one of these three things happen. So, the whole women in refrigerators was slightly misdirected anger. For the Green Lantern example, be mad that it was lazy writing. Be upset that the character wasn't developed enough for the audience to care about them when they died. But to say that a revenge story can't have the death of a wife anymore is just plain dumb. To borrow the phrasing commonly used with authors like this, how would they feel if male audiences went into predominantly women's spaces and started dictating to them what story components could be used? This is literally the same as if I wrote an article about how romance is still using serendipity and we need to get rid of it. Sorry, romance readers. No more destiny or stars for you. We've moved past that as a society. But because of these insanely stupid concepts that aren't well thought out among these Hollywood circles, people that write articles like this are successfully becoming tastemakers among the elite few that get to have their scripts made into movies. And what you get is this. This movie barely made back half of its budget. Half. Imagine telling your boss that not only did you not make them a profit, but you lost half the company's money in the process. Here's where the lesson is. This story is about Eric Draven. It's not about Eric Draven and Shelley. I hate to be the one to tell people this, but who Shelley is or was doesn't matter. She died. We get these brief flashes in the film where we see Eric holding her, sharing a laugh, basking in her presence. We don't need to know that she had a troubled childhood. We don't need to know that she had a controlling mother or that she was valedictorian, because none of that information moves the story forward. What we need to know is what this person meant to our protagonist, and we'll take their word for it. You see in this article a whole lot of dumping on the fact that we only know about this character in that they were pretty, kind, and warm. Well, yeah, because that's what the person is going to remember about their lover if they cared so much about them that they become a one-person army. What's the alternative? That they were really good at taxes and allergic to hamsters? No, of course not. In a revenge story, particularly here in The Crow, we only get to see this person in flashbacks, little snippets of charming memories, because that's all our protagonist is left with now. As an audience, we can immediately connect our own pain of losing a loved one. When it's because of a grave injustice, we could see ourselves wanting to make it right. How do I know this? Well, how about because that's what the original writer of The Crow did? In his real life, James O'Barr lost his fiancée to a drunk driver. He entered military service to try and cope, and when that didn't work, in 1981, he started writing The Crow as another outlet. So, we're coming full circle to the first lesson. When a character tells you who they are, believe them. Eric Draven loved Shelley so much that when she was murdered, his soul couldn't rest. He couldn't go into the afterlife to be with her because the people that killed her needed to pay for what they had done. Take this to its logical conclusion. This guy loved her so much that he held off the afterlife to come back to this slummy city full of pain and sorrow to bring justice to her killers. He could be chilling on a beach with her in heaven and he says, "No, wait, let me go wallow in my pain a while and kill everyone involved." That's literally what the film describes it as, a love so strong that Eric transcends death to make it right for her. Taking his word for it that Shelley was awesome is good enough for me. Instead, the remake goes to great pains to establish Shelley as an equally vital and important character in the story, and there are so many ways that this backfires. Let's start with the obvious problem, which is pacing. Not every side character gets a full arc. Not everyone is a developed character. In the original movie, Shelley's death was the inciting incident, and we're reminded of the pain that Eric is carrying every time we get a flashback. For the purposes of the script, I'm pretty sure Shelley had about the same number of lines and screen time as the hot dog vendor. Do we need to make a full-blown arc for him, or are we going to start seeing articles about how bad it is to use the guy that works at a store local to the hero trope? You see how dumb this is? And let's be clear here, this isn't a gender problem. In Kill Bill, the bride is left for dead while pregnant and getting married and awakes from a coma without a husband or a child. The child is the inciting incident and the baby hadn't even been born yet. The husband is literally never mentioned in the entirety of the both films except in a single flashback and never really by the bride. Take that in. We call her the bride and I'd have to rewatch it to even tell you if they said her husband's name. Getting back to the point, pacing is huge here. Because we spend an entire act establishing this cute couple, we now only have 2 acts to tell the story. In the original film, there was a gang of 4 men that Eric had to go through, and then he found out there was still one more, their boss. In the remake, there's only one antagonist doing all of this because that's all we really have time for. In the original, despite having a gang of 4 men that Eric had to go through, we spent time with Top Dollar and his half-sister/lover, learning about their creepiness and obsession with mysticism. In this remake, it's a dude that made a deal with the devil to live for centuries. It's a gigantic, fantastical jump from the original. The whole Crow brings Eric back is the most supernatural thing that happened in the original. Otherwise, the story is extremely grounded in the real world. The other backfire, which I'm convinced is one of those unintended consequences of the choices that were made here, are regarding Shelley's character. It's that she's the bad guy. Yes, there's this mystical dude saying incantations to make people die, but Shelley knew about that. She also makes a choice at the beginning of the film to cross him by keeping proof against him. She then escapes from a rehab facility, dragging Eric with her because she fears for her life. So they go on the run together until someone catches up with them and kills them both. So, let me get this straight. She decides to cross her magic-powered crime kingpin boss, hides out in a rehab facility, falls in love with one of the patients, has him help her escape, and take her on the run until it gets them both killed. I'm sorry, how is she a sympathetic character? And this is all before we get into the fact that now Eric has to come back and kill her boss, basically doing the dirty work, then not only takes Shelley's place in hell, but she gets to go back and live her life. Like, seriously, this is the story of Eric Draven, world's biggest sucker. The lesson here, among so many other things, is that you should never listen to writing advice from people that aren't writing anything good. Seriously, my writing is influenced by some of the greatest writers of books and film the world has ever known. Why would I ever take advice about what the modern audience wants when no one can prove it to me? Show me the last great book or film that these people made. Go ahead, I'll wait. Oh wait, it's only more bombs like this trash? Well, cool, thanks. I'll stick with Kurt Vonnegut and Quentin Tarantino for inspiration. Does this mean that we can all put our heads down and get back to the business of jamming wives in refrigerators? Well, yes and no. The author of this article does make one salient point, and it's this line right here. And as a viewer, I lose interest when the character I'm supposed to relate to does nothing but scream and die. Now, I say that's a salient point, but not for the reason the author meant it. Somehow, they said that sentence and didn't realize they don't like revenge stories. You're not supposed to relate to the side character that dies before the book or movie started because they're not the main character. They haven't been developed. Why are you trying to invest in something that isn't there? I say that to tie that in with what I said from the very beginning. When your audience tells you who they are, trust them. This person doesn't like revenge stories. You're not writing a revenge story for this person then. Don't ever cater to this very loud and very vocal minority because when they get what they want, they don't ever show up to support it. You're wasting your time. If you're writing an urban fantasy paranormal romance, are you going to break up all the werewolf sex to have an impromptu gunfight? No, of course not. If you're writing a historical biopic, are you going to introduce a time traveler from the future? No, of course not. Unless you're planning on writing like a super cool sci-fi story that I just gave you the idea for. You're welcome. I hand these prompts out like candy. The point is, if you know your audience, then you know the expectations. In a revenge story, I'm not waiting to see if the protagonist gets their revenge. That's a foregone conclusion. What I stick around for, the reason why I watch it, is to see the story unfold. What brought this character to this place? And what will the revenge cost them? How much better will the world be when the antagonist is brought to justice? These are the things I want to know. And if you're a writer of your genre, then I hope you're a gigantic fan of that genre. That's precisely why I've moved around in genres in my own writing, because I love it all. I'm a fan of it all. Give me romantic elements, give me space, give me wizards, and let me have my revenge. Be the biggest fan of your genre, and writing in it should be a breeze. Too often I see people on social media asking perfect strangers if it's okay that they have a character behaving like this, or an antagonist that says things like that. What do you need permission for? Write what's in your heart and your mind, and don't let anyone tell you that we've grown past this. I got news for you. Storytelling only has 36 types of stories according to this guy, and according to Christopher Booker and many modern authors, there are only 7. We don't have the ability to grow past any of those, and we certainly can't afford to give any of them up. Let me allow Eric Draven to sum up my feelings on this.
It's funny. Little things used to mean so much to Shelley. I used to think they were kind of trivial. Believe me, nothing is trivial.
That's it for this week, but don't forget to leave in the comments below anything you'd like to see me cover in a future video. As it was, today's video was brought to you by a previous comment. Also, I have some super big news. Yesterday was the release of Book 2 in the Incursion trilogy, the 7th iteration. So that's now available in paperback and ebook on Amazon. Feel free to check that out. The link is in the description below. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all that jazz. And as usual, have fun and get crafting.